Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. We're going on a journey to uncover the hidden histories of human existence. We're going to look at some profound truths about who we are and where we come from. Truths that have been, well, almost entirely erased from both our conscious minds and our history books.
Think about this stunning paradox, this kind of double feature of human existence. On a personal level, you have completely forgotten the absolute most formative years of your own life. And on a civilizational level, we have collectively overwritten the incredible scientific realities of our ancient ancestors. So today, we're going to explore both of these massive blind spots, starting right inside your own head.
So let me ask you something. Where did your baby memories actually go? Seriously, take a second and think about it. You don't remember being born. You don't remember taking your first step or learning what a dog was. We often just assume babies simply aren't conscious yet, but that is a total myth. Infants are highly active, emotionally responsive beings. They recognize their mother's voice within hours of birth. They have a very real, conscious experience. And yet, everything before roughly age 3 just vanishes into a silent void. Why is that?
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the void, we have to look at the hippocampus. See, memory isn't a video recording where your brain just hits record and saves an MP4 file. Different aspects of an experience, the emotion, the sensory details, the timeline, they're processed all over the brain. The hippocampus acts as this biological filing system that binds those scattered pieces together into a retrievable story. And in human infants, this critical piece of hardware is dramatically, functionally underdeveloped.
If we break down the dense neurology here, there are basically 3 overlapping biological culprits responsible for wiping our earliest memories: hippocampal immaturity, explosive neurogenesis, and the absence of language. These 3 forces are working simultaneously to create a near-total window of amnesia over your most formative years.
Let's look at that second culprit, explosive neurogenesis. A baby's brain is constantly growing brand new neurons, particularly in the hippocampus. It is optimized for absorbing information. Actually, not just absorbing, but absorbing at absolute lightning speed. But think of it like a library that is chaotic and constantly adding hundreds of new shelves every single day. The relentless generation of new neurons totally destabilizes the existing connections. It's essentially trading away stable memory filing, so you can't access it decades later, in exchange for raw, maximum learning capacity right then and there. But honestly, the most fascinating factor to me is the third one, language. You literally cannot build an autobiographical story without a narrator. To remember, I was there and this happened to me, you need the structural scaffolding of language to establish a stable concept of I. The whole internal experience of memory is mediated by language. And we know this isn't just about spoken words either. Studies showing deaf children learning sign language as their first language confirm that it's language as an entire cognitive system that makes memory possible.
So, what does this all mean? The absolute crucial takeaway here is that while your explicit, conscious memories completely vanish, your implicit memories absolutely survive. You forgot the specific experiences, sure, but you kept the lessons. If you were consistently comforted as a baby, your nervous system learned at a deep biological level that distress is temporary. These undocumented early years permanently shape your adult attachment styles, your emotional reflexes, and your body memory. And get this, think about the number 16 to 18. That is how many hours a newborn sleeps every single day. For decades, scientists thought this was just a quirky biological thing. But infants are spending huge amounts of that time in highly active REM-like states. They aren't just wasting time. They are literally building the foundational operating system of the human brain. Experiences are being processed into basic architecture, things like learning how gravity works or how faces convey emotion, rather than being saved as little narrative files.
Now, before we move on, I gotta warn you about something. Fake memories. Think about your absolute earliest memory right now. Is it really a memory? Or is it a mental representation fabricated by your brain because you've seen a photograph of it or heard the story told at family reunions a dozen times? Your brain eventually just files those external stories in the exact same place as actual experiences. Crazy, right? Much of our personal history is simply a story other people told us about ourselves.
So if our personal history is this hidden from us, what about our civilizational history? We really need to dismantle this modern bias that complex scientific solutions are purely modern inventions. For instance, could ancient humans prevent pregnancy? The desire to have sex without having children isn't some new product of the 20th century. It is quite literally one of the oldest human desires on record.
We actually have a vast, well-documented timeline of ancient human attempts at reproductive control spanning multiple empires. We're talking from the Kahun Papyrus in Egypt around 1825 BCE to Hippocrates in Greece, all the way to Cyrannus of Ephesus in Rome. People have always wanted to control their reproduction, and they just used whatever materials were available to them to do it.
Just take a look at the oldest documented evidence we have, the Egyptian Kahun Papyrus. It recommends a barrier method made from, wait for it, crocodile dung mixed with fermented dough. Now, I know crocodile dung might not sound like the most romantic option in the world, but look at the clinical reality. Crocodile dung is highly alkaline, and alkaline environments are incredibly hostile to sperm. This wasn't pure magical thinking. It was ancient Egyptians attempting evidence-based medicine and applying observed chemical logic to a real biological problem.
Now you have to remember, most of this history wasn't actually written down in fancy, elite medical texts. Just like our baby memories, this is an undocumented reality. Plant knowledge was passed down through generations of women, from grandmother to granddaughter via informal oral channels. It was community knowledge, accumulated through deep observation and experimentation over incredibly long periods of time.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ancient pharmacological toolkit. Across completely unconnected traditional cultures on entirely different continents, women were using the exact same categories of plants: Queen Anne's lace, pomegranate seeds, pennyroyal. Modern pharmacological research has actually confirmed that these plants contain biochemical compounds, like phytoestrogens, that directly interact with mammalian reproductive systems. They weren't just guessing, they had discovered real bioactive compounds.
Probably the most dramatic proof of this effectiveness is the tragedy of silphium. This was a North African plant that was heavily documented by ancient Greeks and Romans for its powerful contraceptive properties. It was so highly prized for its efficacy that it literally became the economic foundation of an entire city. It was worth its weight in silver. But human demand was so intense that by the 1st century CE, it was harvested to absolute extinction. It was literally consumed into non-existence, simply because it worked so well. Fast forward a bit to the 2nd century CE, and you've got the Roman physician Cyrannus showing us just how incredibly sophisticated ancient medicine was. He systematically distinguished between contraceptives and abortifacients. He noted that contraception was preferable to abortion for both effectiveness and for the woman's health. He even created a hierarchy of methods based on clinical trade-offs between safety and reliability. That is genuine clinical thinking existing thousands of years ago. They didn't just use plants either. They also deployed physical barrier methods, which were genuine engineering solutions to a mechanical problem. They used wool pessaries soaked in olive oil, which, by the way, actually has spermicidal properties. And we see variations of condoms popping up across independent traditions. Linen sheets in Egypt, goat bladder in Rome, and, sounding deeply uncomfortable, animal intestine and even tortoiseshell in Japan. No way, right? And, well, we also have to mention withdrawal, which appears so universally across historical periods it barely even needs documentation. Here is its modern estimated effectiveness rate: 73 to 96%, depending on how consistently it's used. As a completely cost-free method requiring exactly zero preparation, its massive appeal across the entire span of human history is highly pragmatic and completely self-explanatory. But perhaps the single most widely used and effective method of ancient birth spacing was lactational amenorrhea. In traditional societies, extended breastfeeding, often up to 2 or 3 years, naturally suppresses the hormonal signals that trigger ovulation. Anthropological evidence shows women deliberately extended nursing for this exact contraceptive effect, utilizing an incredibly effective biological loophole.
You know, this knowledge wasn't just some casual lifestyle preference. It was driven by harsh, unforgiving social and economic realities. For enslaved women, an unwanted pregnancy meant a child born into the absolute horrors of slavery. For free women, it was about protecting scarce household resources or avoiding the severe legal consequences of adultery. And for sex workers, who were honestly often the primary preservers of this knowledge, reliable reproductive control was an absolute, immediate necessity for their day-to-day survival.
So, looking at all of this together, it really synthesizes this incredible, almost haunting truth about human existence. Whether we're talking about the rapid, chaotic rewiring of our individual baby brains or the incredible, informal plant knowledge passed quietly among ancient women, we are built from experiences we cannot access and histories we did not write down. Profound, undocumented realities shape literally everything about who we are.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on. The memories are gone, but what they built is sitting inside you right now, quietly running the show in ways you barely notice. The first years of your life and the undocumented centuries of our ancient ancestors, they happened. They mattered. You just weren't allowed to keep the receipts. So I have to ask, what invisible forces from the forgotten past are running your life today? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
Welcome to this explainer. Think back as far back as you possibly can. Try to find the very first moment you existed. You know, you don't remember being born. You don't remember your first word, your first step, or the very first time you tasted something sweet. Okay, let's dive into this because what we're looking at here is one of the most absolutely fascinating phenomena of the human brain, the complete and absolute erasure of your first 3 years of life.
So where did those first 3 years actually go? I mean, everything before roughly age 3 is just poof, completely gone for most of us. And think about that. The first years of your life are literally the most dramatic period of growth and learning your brain is ever going to undergo. Yet, they exist in almost complete silence. We really need to be clear about this right from the jump. This isn't normal forgetting. It's not like forgetting where you left your car keys yesterday. No, this is a systematic, near-total vanishing of an entire chapter of your existence. For the longest time, nobody could satisfactorily explain why this happens. But today, well, we actually have answers.
Now, you might be tempted to think, well, maybe I just wasn't really aware yet. You know, the lights were on, but nobody was home. But that is unambiguously false. You were there. You were highly conscious, you were feeling deeply, and you were experiencing an incredibly complex world. I mean, newborns can recognize their mother's voice within hours of birth. Why? Because they heard it and remembered it from the womb. Within days, you were showing preferences for certain faces. You cried differently for hunger than you did for pain or loneliness. There was this active, curious being processing reality in real time, and yet, not a single bit of it stuck in a form you can access today. To figure out this mystery, we have to look at what memory actually is.
You see, memory isn't a simple record button that files away a single, seamless video clip. It's actually a wildly counterintuitive binding process. The emotional content of an event goes to one place, the sensory details go somewhere else, and the logical narrative, that goes somewhere else entirely. For you to have a conscious memory, all those scattered pieces have to be linked together. And when we look at why infants can't do this, well, we've narrowed this memory heist down to 3 main suspects: hippocampal immaturity, explosive neurogenesis, and the absence of language. Let's interrogate our first suspect, shall we?
Our first culprit is the hippocampus. This is basically the brain's master memory indexer, the vital region that binds all those scattered sensory and emotional pieces into a coherent whole. But in human infants, the hippocampus is dramatically underdeveloped. The raw neurons are there, sure, but that dense, intricate network of links that allows for efficient memory encoding, it simply hasn't formed yet. So a baby experiencing something beautiful or frightening is literally like a state-of-the-art camera without a memory card. The lens is working flawlessly, the processor is running, but there's simply nowhere to store the retrievable narrative video footage.
That brings us to our second suspect, which really helps explain why we still can't remember things from age 2 or 3, even when the hippocampus does start developing. It's a biological process called neurogenesis. For a long time, science thought you were born with all the neurons you'd ever have. Actually, scratch that, we now know that's completely wrong. Your brain grows new neurons continuously throughout your whole life. But in early childhood, the rate of this neurogenesis is just extraordinarily high. The infant brain is heavily prioritizing the generation of new neurons over the stabilization of old memories.
All of those newly generated neurons need to be integrated into the existing network, which is an incredibly disruptive, space-altering process. And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. Imagine your developing brain as a chaotic young library. Hundreds of new shelves are being constructed and crammed into the aisles every single day. The books, which are your experiences, are being added way faster than they can be cataloged, and the fundamental organization system just keeps changing to accommodate the new shelves. This relentless rewiring of the brain is exactly what makes infants such incredible, adaptable learning machines, but it fiercely destabilizes and overwrites any saved memories. The brain essentially trades away memory consolidation in exchange for maximum learning speed.
Our third suspect is perhaps the strangest, most fascinating culprit of the whole shebang: the absence of language. You might logically think, well, of course babies don't have verbal memories, they don't have words yet. But the connection between memory and language is much deeper than that. It's structural. When you remember something today, you're actively narrating a story to yourself. You have a distinct sense of self moving through time. But without language, There is no internal storyteller. There's no conceptual scaffolding to build an I. And without an I to anchor the story, autobiographical memories simply cannot be built. Get this. Studies even show that bilingual children often have their clearest early memories tied specifically to the language they were actively using at the time. Insane, right?
So we have our three culprits working together to create this formidable window of total amnesia. But right now, I bet you might be thinking of a very early memory you personally possess. Maybe you clearly remember being 2 years old at a birthday party, seeing the bright balloons and all that. Well, I have an uncomfortable truth for you. What you think you remember might be a total counterfeit. Let's look at exactly how that happens.
Memory researchers have extremely well-documented evidence that our brains effortlessly fabricate experiences. It usually happens in a few steps. Say your family has a photo of your second birthday sitting in an old album. You see the photo. The adults around you frequently tell you the funny story of how you smashed the cake in your hair. Over time, you build a highly vivid mental representation of that event based entirely on those external inputs. And eventually, your brain misfiles that mental reconstruction right alongside genuine memories. It feels completely real. You'd swear in a court of law you were there consciously experiencing it. But you are actually accessing a reconstruction. Your memory of your earliest life is, at least partly, a story other people told you about yourself.
Now, this framework also explains why some people actually do have slightly earlier memories than others. The onset of memory isn't identical across the board. Culture plays a huge role here. In cultures where parents actively engage in collaborative reminiscing, frequently asking things like, "Remember when we went to the beach?" children develop earlier autobiographical memories because memory is practiced as a daily social skill. Gender socialization around emotional expression plays a role too, and notably early emotional stress is a massive factor. The amygdala, which is our emotional alarm system, develops much earlier than the hippocampus, so intense fear or stress can leave heavy emotional residues that surface later in life, even without any accompanying narrative story.
But let's pivot for a second and consider a massive number, 18. That is how many hours a newborn sleeps every single day. And their sleep architecture is radically different from adult sleep. They spend way more of their time in active, REM-like states. For a long time, researchers thought this was just a quirky biological necessity for physical growth. But we know memory consolidation happens primarily during sleep. So what on earth is an infant doing for those 18 hours if they aren't saving memories?
So, the crucial point is this. The infant isn't wasting time, and they certainly aren't saving individual files. They're installing the software. Your earliest experiences weren't being lost at all. They were being permanently, irrevocably converted into the foundational operating system of your brain. You don't remember learning how faces work, or how gravity works, or how to read subtle emotional meaning in a parent's voice. You don't have a story about learning those things because that data was processed entirely into capability rather than narrative.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to recognize the profound contrasts between explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory is the conscious narrative, the detailed stories you can access, retrieve, and tell your friends at a dinner party. Infantile amnesia completely erases your explicit memory. But implicit memory, that lives deep in your body. It's your automatic assumptions about the world, your raw emotional reflexes, your core attachment patterns. Infantile amnesia leaves your implicit memories entirely intact.
This leaves an invisible yet intensely powerful legacy within you. The experiences you cannot remember absolutely shaped who you are right now. The attachment patterns you formed, whether you learned early on that the world was safe and responsive or unpredictable and cold, they are encoded as default calibrations in your nervous system. If you were consistently soothed as a baby, your biology learned that distress is temporary. If not, your baseline for safety was calibrated entirely differently. This deeply biological encoding even extends to inherited generational trauma, where anxiety patterns and default expectations are passed down from caregivers who were shaped by early experiences that they couldn't remember either. In short, you forgot the experiences, but you kept the lessons. Now, I know this realization can sound a bit terrifying at first because you can't go back and audit those first 3 years to understand exactly why you are the way you are. But honestly, it's also incredibly liberating because you don't have an explicit, locked-in narrative. The story isn't rigidly fixed. The human brain is remarkably plastic. These early patterns are highly influential, for sure, but they are not your destiny. They are simply your starting position. Through safe relationships, gathering new evidence, and conscious effort, those old, implicit calibrations can absolutely be updated. The first years of your life happened. They mattered more than almost any other years that followed. You just weren't allowed to keep the receipts. Which leaves us with a profound and honestly slightly haunting question to deeply ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If your nervous system, your emotional reflexes, and your deepest intuitions are heavily built from a history you cannot access, who is the real narrator of your life? Thank you so much for exploring this mystery with me.